And specifically, our agenda is that we're going to look at what are active reports. We're going to look at a few examples of active reports that are pre-built for our demo today. And then we're going to look at how active reports are created, and we're actually going to spend time building an active report. So this is not just a showing you a finished product. We'll actually get into the technical details of how you build a report, and we'll build a pretty simple but slightly complex active report through the course of the webinar. And then at the end, we'll answer any questions that we've seen throughout the webinar. So our first real focus here then is what are active reports. Active reports are a new concept within Cognos 10 for your end users, your people who would maybe be consuming distributed reports. And they're built to be taken offline, but they can still be used within Cognos Connection. They're built to be sent out, so they're actual single files. And within the single file, there's actually multiple levels of detail. So you're not looking at only the top level of detail. It's not a static report. Even though it's a physical file, you can interact with it. You can click on things and drill down and have your report change based on what you're clicking on. Again, though, the great thing is that it's a distributed single report, and it's in the form of an MHT file, which is a Microsoft technology that allows all that data to kind of be built in the underlings of the report. This can be consumed through any web browser, and I've got a few examples here that I want to look at for our webinar. So if I just click on one of these, it will open up an Internet Explorer. That's my default. You can see that this is actually located on my desktop. It's an MHT file. It looks like a really nice report at first glance, but the key thing here is that this is able to be interacted with. So if I click on Southern Europe, you're going to see all my other charts change. So it's not a static report. It's built for the purpose of interaction. These can get much more complex. So our second example here is slightly more complex than the first. We add in the idea of tabbing between different views. So we've got our tabs at the top. We can tab between different dashboards, if you will, maybe change our products, which is really just going to filter the data at the bottom. We can look at, again, the pie concept of clicking on different areas of the pie, maybe changing which areas of the world we're looking at in our chart at the bottom. And then our final tab, same concept, tabbing between countries, tabbing between products. And then our third one here is the last one I'll show, because that fourth one is actually an example of the one we'll build today. And this is going to be an even step further in complexity. You can see we've got kind of a frame around this. We've got a lot of images. We've got scrolling data. We can click on our chart here and see the data below the chart change. We can toggle between products, see the animation to bring in the new sets of data. This is kind of an overview of my environment. I can look at this from a marketing analysis point of view. So maybe I want to look at Texas, and I want to drill into one of my customers, into the products, and see which products that customer is buying. If I want to go to my distribution, I can see by gauge how everything's gone the last 3 years. Maybe I want to see that by bar chart, or I want to see that by pie chart. Or maybe I want to see all of this only as details. So here are all my details. I can interact with these filters on the report, choose a certain product, maybe a certain one of the SKUs within that product in only 1 year. So the really cool thing here is that this is a single file that's been distributed. I still have a lot of flexibility with how I'm viewing it. All right. So back to our slide. So that really, I hope, gives an overview of what an active report is. And the next question then is, how do we create these? Active reports, they are built within Report Studio. So if you're familiar with Report Studio, it's going to be very similar to how you've built reports in the past. What you're going to see, though, is that we've got a lot of new objects available within our toolbox. And those objects are all based on how other objects and how the objects are being brought in are interconnected. So how does each area of the report relate to other areas of the report? You're going to be reusing concepts from previous versions of Cognos, like master detail relationships. These are things that probably a lot of us are already familiar with from Cognos 8. You're going to see those used heavily. And these reports can be built to be as complex or as simple as we want them to be. So I'm going to go ahead and spend the rest of our webinar time actually building out an example of an active report in a Cognos 10 environment. So I'll launch Report Studio, and for the purpose of our demo, I'm going to use Go Sales Analysis. If you're new to Cognos 10, this is actually a new splash screen. Once we say Create New, you'll see a much more familiar screen with a list of different report types. And we've got two new ones here, blank active report and then a regular active report. I'm going to start us out with a blank active report so we can see truly how we would build this from scratch. And the first thing that I want to do in my new active report is I want to start building some idea of how I'm going to format this. So I always use blocks to kind of segment my page. I'm going to do a couple of primary blocks. The top block, I want to add a new object. So as I scroll down in my toolbox, you're going to see we've got a lot of new objects, starting with the deck. We've got data deck, tab control, buttons. These are all related to interactivity on the report. And the first thing that I want to add is a data button bar. So I'll find my data button bar. I'm going to drag that to the top area. I'm also, in my bottom area, I'm going to add a data deck. So what's the difference between these data items and the regular item? Well, the regular items allow you to enter your different maybe cards in your deck or your different tabs in your tab control. With data, you're telling it you're going to populate those from within your package. So I want to populate both of these items with year. So I'm basically going to be creating a filter or a tab control based on year. Let's go to my time dimension, and we'll drag year into the top here. And then we're also going to drag year into the bottom. So I mentioned earlier the concept of interconnectivity. Well, we've got this interesting looking icon here. It's our interactive behavior icon. If I click on this on either of my two objects, I can actually create a link for how these are going to connect to one another. So I'll create a new connection. You see that I've only got two objects so far. I've got a data button bar and a data deck. I'll show you in a minute how we really want to use better naming conventions. So I'm going to go change the names on both of these. But I'm going to connect each one on year, and I'm going to create a new variable called year variable 1. And I'll say connect and OK. So we just saw that those aren't very descriptive names. I'm going to go ahead and choose my data button bar and rename it data button bar dash year. And I'm also going to choose my data deck below, and I'll name it data deck year. So if I created that connection and I had multiple objects on the page, it would be a lot easier to find the two that I want to connect if I had better naming conventions. So the next thing that I want to do now is within my data deck at the bottom, I'm going to drag in another object, and this object is going to be a tab control. I'm going to actually define the elements in the tab control myself. So rather than doing a data tab control, I'm going to do a standard tab control, and I'm going to rename each of these tabs. So the first one, I'm going to look at actually using a different tab for each different way I want to see my data. So I'll name this one pie. I want to see pie charts in this tab. My next one I'll name bar. And then my last one I'll name list. So I'm essentially creating that tab-based control between each of these. The next thing I need to do is I'm going to actually name this to give it a standard name. And I'm going to call it tab control, and I'll call it display type. That's really what I'm changing. And now I need to create interconnectivity for this. Even though there's not necessarily a data source that's going to be setting this interconnectivity, I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to create a new variable within my managed variable area. And I'll just call it display type, or I'll just call it display_v for variable. I want to tell this to use the value of those labels, so those labels that we just typed in. And now I'm able to actually pass that label to other things. And I'm going to choose here that anytime my label item is selected, apply that to my display_v variable. I'll say OK a few times, and I've got interconnectivity now for these objects. The next thing that I want to do now is I want to start populating each one. So I'm going to go to my Pie tab, and I'm sure you're all familiar with creating charts. So I'll go ahead and create a pie chart. And within pies, I'll just do a 3D pie chart. For this pie chart, again, concept is going to keep it simple for the webinar. I'm just going to drag in product line and revenue from my package. So we'll start with our revenue and drag that to the measure. And then we'll use product line for our actual pie slices. Now, there's an important step here. Because we're actually filtering, essentially, these lower sections on year, I need to add year to my query for the pie. So I'm going to go to the query, and I'm going to go ahead and drag year into this query. And then the final step to ensure that that connectivity is set properly, and I'm sure many of you have used this in the past, is I'm going to create a master detail relationship between my first query on year and this query for year, and say OK. So that's all set up how we want it. I'm actually going to do the same thing for the next tab, but rather than reinvent the wheel, I'm just going to go ahead and copy my pie chart, and I'm going to paste it into my bar area and use the ability to convert this chart type to convert it into a bar chart, rather than having to rebuild all those steps. So I'll do a bar. I'll do a clustered cylinder bar, one of the new features, new bar types in Cognos 10. You see we lose a few formatting things that are unique to pie charts, so that's fine. And now I'm already done with that bar tab. And then finally, I've got my list tab. So I could just put a simple list in here with the same sets of data. I want to show how we would add one more level of interconnectivity. So I'm going to go ahead and within my list tab, I'm going to create a couple more blocks. And for the top block, I'm actually going to drag in a new one that we've not done yet. I'm going to do a radio button group. And again, I'm going to define my radio button. And what I want to do is instead of showing all of my objects, I'm just going to show the top X. So I'll create a top 5 option, and I'll create a top 10 option. And then I'll delete our third tab or our third button. So you see we've got top 5 and top 10. I'm also in my lower section, I'm going to create a new deck. Again, not a data deck, so I'll be defining this deck. I'm going to have it match that toggle. And I'll call this deck the same thing. So we'll say our top 5 and our top 10. So again, I've got to create the interconnectivity. So interactive behavior. I want to create a connection. Normally I would have named these, but we've only got one radio button group, and we've only got one deck. And we're going to join those on label. So we'll say connect, and essentially what we've just done is that if I click up here, it's going to pass this label of top 5 down to my set of cards at the bottom to make sure that the top 5 card is showing, the card within my deck. So now I need to populate each of these, and we said this is our list tab, so naturally I'll put lists in. So for my top 5 lists, I'm going to go ahead and drag in, again, instead of product line, I'm going to do product type. And I'll stick with revenue as our measure. Just like before, I need to go to this query, and I need to drag in year so that later we can create that master detail relationship. I'm going to drag in one more thing as well, though. So since this is a top 5 list, I'm going to drag in a new data item to rank each of my product types. We'll just rank based on revenue. I'll name that new data item rank. And I'm going to create a filter that says that rank is less than or equal to 5. And then one final step is that I need to make sure this is done after auto-aggregation, or otherwise we wouldn't actually see our totals by product type. So almost done. We've got our top 5 built. The last thing that we want to do is we want to click on this and create a master detail relationship based on year and say OK. So we want to do that same thing for our top 10. So we'll toggle over now to our top 10 card. Repeat the same steps. So we're going to drag in a new list. We'll drag in from our products group our product type. We'll drag in our revenue. We'll go to this query. And within the query, we're going to drag in year as well as a new data item. We'll create that rank like we did before based on revenue. We'll give it a nice new name of rank and create that filter for rank is less than or equal to 10. Again, we want to make sure that's done after auto-aggregation. And to finish up our report, we're going to right-click on this and create that same master detail relationship based on year. So at this point, we've created our example. I'm going to go ahead and save it. And I'll save it over the one that I created earlier, just so we can look like when it runs how it runs. If I go back now to my public folders, I'll drill down into that package and I'll find that report. And I've got the ability now to schedule this or run it. And what you'll see is that whenever we run this, we only have one format option, HTML. It doesn't give us other options because it's really going to create an MHD file. I'll choose the paper, and I'll go ahead and let that run and say OK. Now, because it's aggregating so much data, I will preface this by saying that it is going to take a bit longer than a normal report to build because it's building every level of that data. And while that's running, we'll actually come back to our folder, and I've actually got this pre-built. So we can open up my example here and see that it is running active control. And we'll see what we've essentially just built in our webinar is a year-based toggle at the top, whereas we change between years, our data at the bottom changes. We can also change how we view that data, so pie versus bar. We can also choose to view it as a list and have our top 5 or our top 10. So essentially what we've done in this webinar is we've walked through what an active report is, how we actually create an active report, and we've looked at a final version of an active report. So how is this actually used in practice? The best way to look at this is it's an amazing way to distribute data to your end users. It can be used within Cognos. So I could have run that and choose to view it now. I'm sure you saw that option whenever I was running. But it's really meant for distribution. So think of the old Power Cube days, whenever you could take a report offline with a Power Cube. You have to have PowerPlay to interact with it, and you're really limited to the cube. Think of this as a mini cube or a mini set of data that you're sending out to maybe your clients or your internal users, allowing them to see sets of data. So with that, we'll go back to our slideshow. And I believe we probably have some questions. I've seen a few pop up on the display on the right. I'll go ahead and start answering some of the questions. If you have additional questions, please type them in now, and I'll answer as many as I can before we wrap up. All right, so it looks like a few of these are being answered as we're going through. by some of my colleagues that are on the line, but I'll read a few. So how does it work if you were to send the active report to different users? That's actually the intention of it, is to be able to send to different users. I think that person actually wrote a follow-up. I meant, will it work like a document file that can be shared? And yes, it will. So an MHT file is a simple HTML all-inclusive file that can be sent out to multiple users and shared. There is a licensing cost, so Cognos does consider this a user. If there are questions at all about the licensing of this, we'd be happy to take those questions offline. Will I be distributing a copy of this presentation after the webinar? I'd be happy to. The links aren't going to work. They're local links for my laptop here. How big are the active report files, for example, the sample that we've shown? So excellent question. Let's go look at them. These range from 2 megs to 6 megs, or I guess 1.5 megs for the one that we just built. They can be very large, but keep in mind that what we're doing here is we're actually aggregating all of our data, all of our visuals, and putting them all into one file. So it does sense for these larger files. As you imagine, that can become an issue for distribution. So if you're wanting to email, you will need to make sure that you're within the realm of your email capacity. If you're wanting to maybe distribute these out to a file system, it's much less of an issue. Is the webinar recorded? Yes, we are recording the webinar. So following the webinar, we will have a link sent out that will let everyone see that. So I do see a question about supported browsers. Firefox does not natively support MHT files, nor does Safari, but I believe both have add-ins. So Firefox will have an add-in that allows MHT files to be opened. Can you add sort and filter options to the list report? Absolutely. So there are all kinds of options for sorting, for filtering. For, if you notice on each of our chart objects and list objects, you can actually add interactivity for those as well. So the examples we were showing at the beginning were clicking on pie chart pieces and having data updates. That can be set up. If you choose to run the report now instead of saving, will the performance suffer? So it is going to take a while for the report to load. But once the report's loaded, there's not going to be any performance issues because it is pre-aggregating everything for the report. So there may be a delay. If you want your users to interact within Cognos, I would actually recommend scheduling these reports inside of Cognos and letting people open them and play. Can we download the webinar? Yes, we will have the webinar available for with a link where you can actually view it. So again, that will be emailed out, the link to our webinar following the webinar. Will it work on a mobile device? So my understanding is that it is meant to work on a mobile device, but I believe that there's probably limited in which mobile devices it will work on. So that could probably be a good follow-up question that we can get back out to this person. How many gauges can be in a page? Is there a limitation? So I'm not aware of a limitation, but apparently I know there was one in previous versions of 8. So that could probably be another question that could be taken offline. I could try to find an answer. Is it only HTML? It's actually MHT, but yes. So the run type is only HTML. How can you refresh them? You just simply rerun them. So in place, you would choose to run instead of loading the latest. Can users refresh the report that have already been distributed? No. So once it's distributed, it's a static file, although it's a very interactive static file. Can you use these new controls for standard online reports? So they're actually still active reports, so you would have to use the active report template, which has all the same features as a standard report plus some. The difference is that it will only be able to be run to MHT. Can users print out the data? So if you are on a screen that you like, you could print it, but it would print just like a regular web page would print. Is there a way to reuse functionality from an existing report? My understanding is that, yes, there is a way to convert existing reports over to active reports, but I can honestly say I've not done this before, so I would need to look into how to do that. Can we open them in Excel? You can, but I will say they don't look great. So MHT files in general can be opened in Excel, but you're essentially just going to get all the images and all the data, so they're not really going to look like reports. Can MHT files work out of SharePoint? I'm not super sure on that. I don't know of a reason why they wouldn't, since that is web-based. So I think if you loaded one in SharePoint, it should work fine. If you wanted to set security by product line, you would do that just like you would with regular Report Studio. So you would have to have a security group within your model. Are there any issues running with Firefox? I think to answer that one. Is there a limitation on the size of the files? There's no limitation, so they can grow. They can be as big as the amount of data you're putting into them. So it's not like Power Cubes where you hit a limit. I would imagine that these are really meant to be distributed, so you probably don't want them to get too large. Can you burst by email? Absolutely. That's one of the ways they're meant to be used. So I would highly recommend looking at ways to use active reports in a bursted fashion. Is there any documentation on how to create these reports? I've had a lot of trouble finding documentation, but I know that we're searching internally for it. So if we do find that, I'm sure we'll be providing a link out on our website. If you maybe want to check the Cognos 10 section of our website frequently or periodically. Does MHT allow security? So the only security that can be set on an MHT file would actually have to be set after the MHT is created. So Cognos does not allow like encryption like they do with PDF, and really that's a product of MHT files. So you could actually set up a layer if you're bursting between the file and the email system to actually encrypt and provide an encryption key to your users. Does the data source have to be dimensional? No, it does not. I just used dimensional for our demo, so I knew it would come back a little bit quicker. In terms of the loading, once it's loaded, they're always going to be as fast as the ones we were looking at. Does Drilldown supported? Yes, it is. Drill through, if you're connected to the server, then yeah, drill through would still work as well. We've actually got probably about 50 questions. So if I'm missing yours, I apologize. We'll definitely follow up on each of these individually after the call. Are there any Cognos templates or public templates for active reports? I believe there are. I can check on that. If there are, we'll probably make those available on our website as well. And we'll make sure to send a note to everyone who attended today. Can you view active reports in Cognos Insight? I'm not sure if you could in Cognos Business Insight. I'm assuming this is the same in there. I'm not sure how that would work, since these are really meant to be distributed reports. You would probably just want to use a standard report for Business Insight purposes. Are they going to extend security to make it so you can prevent anyone from opening these files? I would imagine so, but I don't know that for sure. If the report has a prompt by department, can you secure by department? Yes, I'd probably, I mean, you could secure who could run the report, but once it's distributed, once it's actually saved as an MHT file, there's no way to control who can see it. And then can the MHT file be password protected? You could use an outside securing tool to set that up to protect it and encrypt it. Does it make sense to use active reports instead of regular reports, even if they're not meant to be distributed, since the controls seem much better? You can do that. So if you wanted to start building active reports as a standard, or maybe you just want more control within the reports you're building, you can build these and actually access them from within Cognos Connection. And then I probably had a handful of people ask if they could see the example reports again. So I'm going to go ahead and go back through the example reports, and then we'll wrap up unless I see any pressing questions come up. So the first one that we looked at here is probably the most simple one, where you can just toggle your views of the data. You see that each time you click a new section, it changes the view. The next one is slightly more advanced with a tab control. It's a tab between different areas of the report. So I can filter each of these as well. Or I can just tab to a new tab and look at an overview. Here's my finance view. Sales and marketing. And I can choose how much of the data to see at the bottom. I can also toggle between which charts I want to see on the right. And then our final tab here is, again, toggling between country, toggling between products, and see all of our objects change. And then the last pre-built one, the last kind of advanced one, and this is the one that has the 3 different sections, a little bit more of a graphical background, the scrolling data. This is by far the most advanced one. I don't know if you guys noticed, this is actually not the largest one in size. This one's only about 4 megs. But you can see all of our data scroll on. Our market analysis here is looking at it by maybe state, and we can drill down within certain customers by the state and then into their product lines and seeing how much that customer is actually doing. And then our final tab here is looking at different ways to see the data. So maybe instead of by gauge, by bar chart, or by pie chart. So this is very similar to the simple one that we did, except we used tab control, and this is just a radio button control. And then we can choose if we want to see it maybe only in details, and then interact with our filters here within the report. This is how we can set filters and change how we're viewing our page. So that's it for active reports. We definitely appreciate everyone coming today. If you have any questions after this, you can feel free to send an email to sales@brightstarpartners.com, or we'll be sending out a follow-up email shortly with a link to the recording. Feel free to distribute that to your colleagues or respond to that email with any questions. So thank you for joining our webinar, and we look forward to next month.